After you have your baby, the party's not over. Now, your uterus is going to shed its lining, and the stuff coming out of you is known as lochia, and it's made up of blood and tissue and mucus, very similar to the world's heaviest menstrual period. First 1 to 3 days are going to be the heaviest, and you can expect to bleed anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, sometimes even longer if you're lucky. You may notice that when you're laying flat, because we know that when you have a brand new baby, you're doing a ton of sleeping, but you go from laying flat to standing up, your flow might increase. That's because the flow coming out of your uterus is going to pool in the vaginal canal while you're laying flat, and then when you stand up, out it comes. That's pretty normal, but just make note that after that initial gush, that the flow does not stay increased. There are 3 phases of flow that you're going to experience as you go through your postpartum recovery. The first phase, from birth upwards of 3 days, is known as lochia rubra. This phase is going to be the heaviest bleeding of all, so stock up on your pads. The flow coming out of you is going to be mostly dark red in color. It's going to be mostly blood, but there might also be some blood clots in there. Now, depending on the size of the blood clots is depending on if it's normal or not. Size of blood clots of like a quarter, a loonie if you're Canadian, all the way upwards of like a golf ball size, that can be normal, although it can be surprising when they come out. But if you are passing blood clots, just take a note of how many there are and the size of them and report them to your provider if needed. The next phase of bleeding, around days 4 through 10, is known as lochia serosa. Now, what's important to note is that the color is changing from reddish to more of a pinkish brown, and this was the best that I could do with the kitchen supplies that I had. But important to note, the color is changing, and also the flow is starting to lessen, although it will still be a flow at this point in time, but you should be able to downsize the pads that you have. Now, let's note about blood clots. If you're having them in this phase of the game, it could be a problem, so please let your provider know if you are passing them. Also, if you're in this stage and all of a sudden you go back to this stage where your bleeding is brighter and more liquidy and much, much heavier, that is also something that you should let your provider know about right away. And the last phase, too, whenever you stop bleeding, you're moving into something called lochia alba. And you get to graduate to like cutie patootie little pads or panty liners, because it should now no longer be a flow. It should be more like intermittent, heavier discharge. The color that you're going to note is now changing from pink into this yellowish or whitish color, and there should not be blood clots, it should not be a heavy flow, and it should not smell bad. Any of those things are definitely going to be signs that you want to let your provider know about right away.